Made by Sue here, and I've been working with some Halloween fabric, and I've been making some table toppers, and which I will do a video on shortly and post it for you. But the pattern calls for width of fabric strips, strip piece together. And so I thought I would do a standalone video on that portion to show you how I cut the strips and then sew them together so they're nice and even. So let's get started. I'll show you how I do it. I'll be cutting strips today 2 inches wide. Here's one that I previously cut. Here's the fabric I'll use today. And so it'll be 2 inches wide by the width of the fabric. And the width of fabric simply means from one selvage, shown here, to the other selvage, which is down here. And I put it on my cutting mat so you could see the measurement. It's approximately 44 inches. I folded my fabric, selvage to selvage. I'll need to even out my end here before I do any cutting, but before I even do that, I like to rip the fabric, and that just makes sure that I have the straight of grain accurate. So I just kind of start with the scissors and then rip, and it'll stay right along the straight of grain. And you can see how off the straight of grain it was. And I went ahead and tore off a piece of fabric because I was working with a 2-yard piece, so it was kind of cumbersome. So just for ease of the video. And so I have it at my pressing area. I'll be using some starch, and this is just some faultless starch that you can pick up anywhere. Super cheap. And I'll give it a good spray. I'll just do a section at a time here. And just use your favorite starch. There's a lot of them out there. You can even make your own starch. And then I'll just move on to the next section. Repeat that. Now it's all pressed and starched. I've simply folded it again, selvage to selvage. What I'll do first is even out my edge where I tore the fabric. And I'm using a 24-inch ruler here. So all I'll do is line up one of my lines on my ruler with this bottom fold. And it's nice to have really good lighting here, especially when you're dealing with dark fabric. And here's a little closer up view. So I'm lining up this line right here with my fold. And you want to make sure you hold down your ruler firmly, and then when you're cutting, press downward. And you have a nice straight edge. Now I'll reposition this so it's to my left. Now take your ruler, and again I want a 2-inch strip, so I'll just line up my ruler at the bottom, again on my fold, right here, and then at my 2-inch mark. So once you have it all on your 2, squared up down at the bottom, cut your strip. And I'll line it up again, because I do need a couple of these strips. Line at the bottom, and my 2-inch mark. So you can see, by using that starch and being very careful with measuring and keeping the fabric, starting with the fabric on the straight of grain, you get a very nice strip with no bumps and waves in it. Now I'll sew my first 2 strips together. I have a dark and a light, and I just have a little pencil mark here, and that just indicates to me that's where I began sewing, because I want to alternate the directions that I sew. And I'll just place these right sides together I won't pin them. And then I will, before I begin sewing, I will take it back over to the iron and just press where my folds are so it's nice and flat. So I'll do that and then I'll meet you at the sewing machine. I have them all lined up. I have my leader fabric, my 1/4 inch presser foot, and I'll actually move my needle just a thread's width, so I'll be sewing a scant 1/4 inch. I find I get better results with that. And as I sew these, I'll hold them together and not pulling them out of shape or anything, but holding them enough that they're a little bit taut. Hopefully that makes sense. And you can see they're not even on the ends. That's just because fabrics have different widths. Before I add any more strips to my set, I will press. And this is where your fabric can really get distorted. So I've already starched it. I'll set my seam. I'll be pressing toward the dark. And I'll finger press it at first and just keep it very straight and press. And it's important not to move your iron around too much here at this point. You just literally want to press down on your fabric. And I'll continue pressing and meet you back over at the cutting area. And before I add more strips, I always like to check my work and make sure that it's lined up, that my strips are lined up. So now it should measure in the center 1 3/4 inches. So I just make sure it lines up all the way down. I do have a little bit of extra fabric right here that I'll go ahead and trim off. And that's because I used my scant 1/4 inch seam allowance and wasn't probably exactly lined up with my sewing. But that's why I like the scant 1/4 inch, because you can always trim off if you need to. And here's my mark from where I started sewing. So I'll add my next strip and I'll just sew it from this end. Like so, and I'll take it to the machine. I'll sew again a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll do that off camera. And I just wanted to show really quickly that for this pattern that I'm using these strip sets for, the seam allowances all have to be going in the same direction on my strip set. So I'll be pressing toward my lighter fabric. And that's not ideal, but sometimes you have to. So again, I'll just do the same thing, finger press, and I actually think I'll use some more starch. And then again, just press. And then I would do the same thing I did before, match up my lines on my ruler with my seam line, and do any trimming if necessary. There you have it, a width of fabric strip set. And I hope you find these tips helpful. When I can, I try not to make the width of fabric. I'll always try to cut my strips in half and then sew them into a strip set. It just seems like you get much, much better results. But sometimes some projects you just have to have the width of fabric. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.